It's time to listen different with Podcast 411, the podcast that brings you the 411 on podcasts, podcasters, and podcasting.
Welcome to the May 7th show. I'm your host, Rob, and this is the Podcast 411 podcast. On today's show, our guest is Rick Klau from FeedBurner. Let me start off by saying today's interview with FeedBurner is not a sponsorship, a commercial, or an infomercial for FeedBurner. It comes out of the fact that I contacted FeedBurner because I had some questions about their service and I wanted to learn more, and I felt what better way to learn more than to do it as an interview and put it up on the podcast so that we could learn about their service. Going forward, every few weeks, I plan to have someone from a podcasting service or support for podcasters come on the show to talk about their service so that we can learn more about those services. There is no quid pro quo, like I said. I'm not getting anything out of this. There's no sponsorship deal. There's no agreement for them to put links or anything on their website. Okay, quick reminder before we get into the interview. Check out the forum boards. Go to the main page, click on the forum boards up at the top, and leave some information. The forum boards only work if you guys contribute. So get out there, leave some messages, learn something, and especially if you have any skits, put links to your skits in the forum board. It's a good way for you to promote your site. Well, that's going to do it for the notes today. We're going to go ahead and get right into the interview with Rick from FeedBurner. Here we go. Rick, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much. A pleasure to be here, Rob.
And if you hear any snorting in the background, that is because my pug has decided to jump here on my lap, and so she might snort a little bit.
Well, I'm jealous. I just started commuting again after working out of the house for about 18 months. So in addition to missing my 3- and 5-year-old kids at the house, I also have about a 90-pound golden retriever sitting at home. So don't get to see them quite as much coming into the city.
I guess the first question would be, why should someone choose to use FeedBurner? What are some of the features you guys offer?
Well, we have a couple of things that I think are particularly targeted to podcasters. The first is probably answering the question that most want to know an answer to and have the hardest time discerning, and that is how many people are actually subscribed. Because of the vagaries of how RSS works, as a delivery mechanism, it's excellent at transmitting content from point A to point B, including audio, obviously, but pretty hard to actually identify how many people are hitting that file. One aggregator or podcatching client might ping an XML file every hour on the hour, and that would result in 24 hits to the file over the course of a day and only represent one person. Web-based aggregators like Bloglines or NewsGator are going to hit it once but might represent 100 people on the other end of that request. So one of the things we do that is perhaps most valuable to people who use the service is just answering that question. We provide a lot of analytics where we look at the traffic coming through our system and can tell you exactly how many people are in fact subscribed to your podcast feed. That alone is a significant piece of information for anyone trying to figure out just how large their audience is.
How accurate is that number? Is that an estimated number using some algorithm, or is there some proprietary thing that you're doing to get a very dead nuts on number?
Well, I think that we're going to tell you it's as accurate as it is possible to be, and we're always tuning the algorithms to get more specific. But we'll just start with a couple of numbers. First of all, we're aware of over 600 RSS readers. Now, obviously, in the podcasting world, that number is going to be a subset of clients that are most likely being used. But for example, I use NewsGator, which is an aggregator that works with Outlook as well as has some online equivalents, and I can download all the enclosures from the RSS feeds with NewsGator. So I don't need to use a podcatching client to retrieve those files. I have NewsGator set up to query the files every half an hour. Bloglines, on the other hand, will query the feed once an hour or when it's pinged to know that a feed has been updated. Now, there may be one person subscribed to that feed. There may be 100 people. We're able to pull that number out of the request that's sent from blog lines. So we know exactly how many people are subscribed in blog lines. We know exactly how many people are subscribed using NewsGator online services. And then the other things are just being smart about understanding behavior over time. We look at every one of those RSS readers to understand. So we are able to figure out that based on our own understanding of having looked at all of these readers, how often they ping by default. We're able to look at if it's the same user agent being passed through in the request and it's pinging on a regular interval, then that's likely to be the same computer. And in many cases, if it's client software, we know that that's one individual. If it's the same user agent but different IP addresses, then that's probably different people within the same network that are using the same program. So there's a lot of analytics that goes into identifying that number. Might we be off by 1 or 2 or 5 people? Probably, because of the nature of how this works. That said, we're giving a very, very accurate assessment of how many people are hitting that feed. Certainly orders of magnitude better than simply guessing based on the raw number of hits to the XML file, which is really all anybody else has to go on if they don't use something like us.
How many podcasters are using your service today, roughly?
We are, in fact, I was just talking with someone else earlier today. I don't have a precise number today because it's just been a few weeks since we've run the stats, but I believe the number is somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000.
Podcasters.
And, well, that's podcast feeds. So that is, there's going to be a smaller number of actual podcasters. It's not a perfectly one-to-one correlation.
If you go by the other numbers, you hear that there's 5,000 podcasters out there. It sounds like you've got over 50% of the podcasters.
I think it's a safe assumption that we have a majority of the market using us, yes.
One of the things that I guess is the biggest issue is that, okay, you are already a podcaster, like, say, myself, and you've got 40, 50 podcasts out there, and you've gotten your XML file out to 1,000 different people who are subscribed to your show, and it's in 30 different podcasting directories, and you're not using FeedBurner at this point in time.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have to change your XML feed name in all these directories and with all the people that are subscribed if you want to switch over to FeedBurner?
Great question. It's probably the most misunderstood part of our service, and the answer is no. You don't have to change the source file. There's a pretty simple server configuration that can be done on a web server that says if anybody out there on the internet requests file index.xml, let's assume that that's your podcast feed name, that you can configure the server to say whenever a request for that file comes in, instead of giving them that file, send them over to this place. This place, in FeedBurner's case, being the FeedBurner URL. So using what's known as a URL redirect, you as the owner of the domain with a URL that is already propagated all out over the internet don't need to tell anyone to change anything. All you need to do is add this one line of code to your server configuration, which is, even for novices, just a few minutes, and we've got detailed FAQs up on our website about how to do this, that will then redirect those requests out to FeedBurner. Now, taking my FeedBurner hat off for a minute, well before I joined the company, I started testing out the service almost a year ago. It's, in fact, how I met the founders here. And my first observation was, I know nothing about this company. I don't know if they're going to be around in a month. I don't want to let them hijack my feed. I was a relatively popular blogger, similar to your comment about having this feed known to a number of subscribers, a number of directories. Last thing you want to do is try and chase every one of them down and say, okay, you've got to update this. And following these directions was able to configure my server so that my feed, as far as the outside world knows, has not changed. And yet I'm actually serving that feed through FeedBurner. The advantage to me, no one knows that my feed is any different. I get the advantage of all the statistics, all of the processing that FeedBurner does on that feed. And that's true whether it's for a blog feed or a podcasting feed.
Because honestly, that was my biggest concern, which was I didn't want to make the change just because of the hassle to my subscribers and trying to chase everything down.
Absolutely. I agree with you wholeheartedly, and I've probably had this conversation in the last 2 weeks with a dozen people. Jeff Kleinman, the guy at DVD Talk Radio, he and I knew each other from before. I gave him a heads up that I had joined FeedBurner, and his comment was, well, good for you, but I would never give my feed to them because I'd be afraid of what would happen if I got unhappy with the service. And I said, but see, that's the thing. You don't ever have to give up control of your URL to get the advantage of running this feed through FeedBurner. So now DVD Talk Radio as a podcasting feed has been running through FeedBurner for a week, and no one knows.
The next biggest question from everyone, I got to imagine, is going to be, how long will this stay free?
We closed a relatively large funding round about a month ago. And in the blog entry on our website, our CEO, Dick Costello, made a point of answering that question preemptively and saying, look, before anybody gets a sense that we're going to turn around and hijack the 50,000 feeds we're already hosting, let me be very clear. The services that are free today will always be free. That is an absolute promise to our user community. There is no question whatsoever that the services we are providing today remain free, without exception. Now, next week we'll be launching the first of several new products that enhance and extend the product line. They will be premium services that will have a fee associated with them. And they are things like extended stats. So for folks who are doing this as a hobby, probably the free stats are plenty to give you an answer to the question, how many people are listening, how many people are reading. But for folks for whom this is a business, or for whom they're thinking about making it a business, more detailed analytics are going to be very helpful. And it will be stats down to the item level. Are people clicking through? What are they clicking through? When are they clicking through? What's the popularity of an item over the life of its presence in a feed? Where is my content showing up? Are people linking to it from other places? A lot of information that will identify trends and exceptions in the performance of that feed. We are also currently looking at, and I would encourage any of your listeners to be vocal in the show notes. You can share my email address, rickk@feedburner.com, and I would encourage any podcaster to share their thoughts with us about what we can do to make the service better. We've already got several things working in the lab. We expect to be announcing and releasing probably over the next couple of months. But we see podcasting as a pretty critical element of our overall success down the road.
Have you thought of positioning yourselves at all as a third-party validator on the numbers so that you can come between advertisers and podcasters, so that when a podcaster says, hey, I'm looking to bring on a certain advertiser and come up with some rates and say, the advertiser goes, well, how do I know what your feeds are, how many people are subscribed? They can point them to you, and that through some sign-off you can release the numbers from the podcaster to advertisers.
That's a great question, and in fact, a variation on how we operate today. Our business model is as not only an RSS management service, but as an ad network for that service. So one of the ways we help publishers, whether the publisher is the equivalent of a broadcaster in the fashion of a podcaster, or a blogger writing primarily on a weblog, we allow them to monetize those feeds if they want. Now, one of the big worries people had was that we would somehow force people to accept ads, and that is absolutely not our plan, and will not be our plan. But for those who choose to enable advertising in their feeds, we are absolutely an enabler of that, and are building out relationships with advertisers every day who want to reach a very targeted, very attractive community of listeners and readers. And we see that as a tremendous opportunity for our growth as well as our users' growth.
Anything else you'd like to add on your service?
I think you did a great job of covering with a broad brush what we're trying to accomplish and how we can add value. I'd simply reiterate that we are always eager to hear feedback. We try and do a pretty good job of looking for where people are talking about us, whether it's on our own forums or on their sites individually, and reaching out and engaging with folks. But if we've missed someone sharing a comment about us, positive or negative, feel free to direct it to our attention. We pride ourselves on being very responsive.
Okay. Well, Rick, thank you very much for coming on here and answering the questions I had. And just to let everyone know that there was no quid pro quo here, and all the questions I came up with beforehand without talking to Rick.
Indeed, Rob, it's been a pleasure. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with your listeners, and hope that we can do this again as we have more things to talk about that are related to podcasters and what we can be doing better. Thanks very much.
Okay, folks, that concludes our interview with Rick from FeedBurner. You can find FeedBurner at http://feedburner.com. Rick, thanks again for being on the show. If you out there would like to be on the show, please send an email to podcast411@gmail.com. That's podcast411@gmail.com. Now, if you're receiving this through a subscription, I should point out, on Thursday, I did switch over my feed service to go through FeedBurner. If you go to the front page at www.podcast411.com, I have a new tutorial up. The new tutorial is using FeedBurner without having to change your RSS URL. And I explained exactly how I did it, using a lot of the notes that Rick supplied, but some other things in there, some other notes. Check out the tutorial if you're interested in using FeedBurner and you don't want to change your RSS URL name. We're going to conclude today's podcast with a promo from Getting a Leg Up podcast. Nikwe sha puten kwama? Idyar? The reason I just spoke in Chinese is because this podcast comes from Taiwan and it's spoken in both English and Chinese and gives you, well, I'll just play the promo here at the end and it'll explain it a little bit better. Mark, Shishi, for sending over the promo. As always, this is Rob from Podcast 411, reminding you to listen different.
我应该要说什么呢？我应该要讲什么呢？ What should I say? Well, why don't I just tell you the truth that this is Getting a Leg Up, which you can find on legup.libsyn.com. That is LEGUP.LIBSYN.com. That's a lot of letters, isn't it? But don't be discouraged because we also speak in Chinese. 我们会说中文，我们很欢迎会讲中文的朋友来听。对呀。So this is where you'll be able to listen to the latest in local bands. Some singing in English, some singing in Chinese, some singing in other Chinese dialects, some singing in Aboriginal languages. It doesn't matter. They're making music and it's great stuff. So if you want to find out about some of the great music in Greater China, in this part of the world, and also find out about some cultural activities and some neat soundscapes from some very, very Chinese and exotic locales, this is the place. And stay tuned and listen because I will be going live to China pretty soon. And we will talk about my experiences and what my eyes are seeing and what China is pitching at me in 3D living Technicolor sound. You got it. So don't forget, this is your place for that dose of Greater China in your ears. That's right. So this is the Brooklyn Blues Man saying, listen in regularly, otherwise, I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to even bother going there. So be there or be square. Bye now.